The 45-year-old man thought he had just lost 0.3 of a second on the racetrack. He did not know that, before Sunday ended, a torn tire would bring him before the one woman who did not need his money, who did not need a name that made boardrooms fall silent, and even less did she need a man who would step into her life and decide for her what was best. The black Porsche 911 GT3 RS tore through the final corner during a closed session at Barber Motorsports Park, east of Birmingham. Malcolm Vale saw the gap inside Terrence Boone's car, just half a second more on the throttle, and he could force his way into it and reclaim the lead. But the front tire temperature had gone beyond the range he wanted. Malcolm eased off the throttle. Terrence crossed the line ahead of him by a margin small enough to enrage any prideful driver. Malcolm was not angry. He pulled the car into the technical area, took off his gloves, then looked at the data board as if those 0.3 of a second were an employee who had just submitted a wrong report. To him, failure was not humiliation. It was a number that needed to be understood before it could be fixed. The car he chose was like him in that way, precise, cold, and hiding none of its driver's mistakes. At 45, Malcolm owned Vale Meridian Group, a conglomerate spanning transportation, food distribution, infrastructure, and technology, operating across 19 states. His net worth was estimated at nearly $19 billion. People said Malcolm could bring a project back to life with a single phone call, or make it vanish by simply not calling. He was still single, not for lack of women wanting to step into his penthouse, nor because he did not know how to feel. Malcolm had once been engaged. He had once believed he would marry, have children, and learn to come home before dinner went cold. But 12 years ago, on this very day, his mother had passed away while he still sat at the head of a long table, closing the biggest deal of his career. He saved 4,000 jobs. He did not make it in time to see his mother one last time. After the session, the private jet was already waiting at the airport. The enclosed transport truck was also ready to take the Porsche back to Atlanta. Malcolm declined both. Terrence looked at the date on his friend's watch, understood the reason, but did not mention the one who was gone. "I can come with you." Malcolm shook his head. There were certain days each year when silence was the closest thing he allowed others to call grief. As he left the track, the rain was only small specks on the windshield. Malcolm merged onto I-20, held a steady speed, and turned off all calls. The work phone sat in the side compartment. His mother's old phone sat in his jacket pocket, no longer connected to any network but still holding a voicemail Malcolm had never deleted. 40 minutes later, the storm changed direction. Wind pushed the water into white streaks across the road. A stretch of highway ahead was closed due to fallen trees and flooding. The navigation system rerouted Malcolm onto a county road, running through the sparsely populated agricultural area southeast of Birmingham. He could have turned back, but traffic had already backed up behind him, and state police were sealing off the exit he had just passed. Malcolm continued on. A branch fell just as he passed a curve. He avoided the larger trunk, but the front right tire ran over a sharp piece of metal hidden beneath the wet leaves. The pressure warning lit up. Almost at the same moment, a low branch scraped the front of the car, dragging a dry, grinding sound from underneath. Malcolm slowed immediately and pulled the car to the shoulder. The tire did not burst. It deflated quickly and quietly. A corner of the carbon fiber front splitter had been pulled loose. The roadside assistance unit received the location, but the bridge to the east was flooded, and the road to the west had 2 fallen tree trunks blocking it. No low-clearance vehicle could reach him before the road crew finished clearing. Malcolm turned off the engine. The silence after the engine noise made the rain sound louder. Less than 100 meters away stood an old iron gate, above it a wooden sign, Ellison Promise Farm. Behind the gate, a woman was trying to pull crates of sweet potatoes off her trailer before the rain ruined the dry dirt still clinging to their skins. She wore faded denim, dark work pants, and boots sunk in red mud. One hand held the tarp cord. The other gripped the cart that was sliding on the sloped ground. The wind tore her hair tie loose, letting a long braid slap against her wet shoulder. Malcolm watched how she checked each crate before carrying it into the barn. Bruised potatoes were set aside. Good crates were brought in first. She worked slowly, with order, as if exhaustion was not permitted to make her careless. Then 2 vehicles appeared. A gray SUV stopped in front of the gate. Behind it, a pickup truck carried orange survey stakes. 3 men stepped out, their raincoats clean enough to show they had done nothing so far except watch other people lose their land. The man in front handed her a waterproof envelope. 30 days, Miss Ellison. Avery May Ellison set the tarp cord under the trailer wheel before taking the papers. She read the first page under the porch overhang. Meanwhile, the survey technician opened the gate and carried the orange stakes onto the path leading to the pecan orchard. "I haven't given you permission to enter the land." Graham Pike smiled, pointed to the last page, and handed her a pen. "The signature only confirms you've received the notice." Malcolm had gotten close enough to see the fine print beneath the signature line. It did not only confirm delivery of the papers, it authorized the designated party to survey, photograph the structures, and transfer the data to potential buyers. He meant to stay silent. This was not his land, not his debt, and the woman had never once looked his way. Then Graham continued, "Your father surely wouldn't want you dragging this out either." Avery's hand tightened around the pen. Malcolm remembered his mother once standing in an empty parking lot, holding the key to the Buick that had been repossessed over a stack of papers she was never fully told about. He stepped through the gate. "That signature doesn't just confirm receipt." The three men turned. Avery looked at him for the first time too. Malcolm stopped a few steps from her, rain running from his shoulders down to a hand no longer wearing a glove. "You've delivered the notice," he said. "She doesn't need to grant anything more to prove that." Graham looked at his racing suit, then at the black Porsche sitting motionless on the road. "Who are you?" Malcolm took a business card from his wallet. Graham took it. His expression shifted before he could hide it, and behind Avery, the first orange stake had just been driven into the ground. Graham Pike read the business card once more, as if the name printed on the white paper might change meaning if he looked long enough. Vale Meridian did not only ship food for major retail chains. The conglomerate was also being courted by Halcyon Land and Energy to join a logistics center project the company wanted to build across several parcels of land in the county. The man standing in the rain did not own Ellison Promise Farm, but one word from him could close a few doors in Atlanta. Malcolm did not threaten to pull his investment. He simply pointed to the fine print beneath the signature line and required the delivery staff to note clearly that Avery had received the notice but had not consented to allow access to the land. When the other man said he needed a signature as proof, Malcolm told them to write down his name, the time, and the license plates of both vehicles in the record. "I'll be the witness." Graham turned to the survey technician. He did not apologize to Avery. People accustomed to turning others' lives into paperwork rarely feel the need to apologize when that paperwork is halted. He simply ordered the newly driven stakes pulled up, confirmed Avery had not granted access, then repeated the 30-day deadline. The first stake was pulled from the mud, leaving behind a small hole filled with red water. Avery stood still until both vehicles left the gate. Then she stepped down from the porch, walking straight toward the last stake still lying by the fence. Malcolm bent down at the same moment, but her hand grabbed the wooden shaft first. She yanked it up with a sharp motion, wet dirt splattering onto the hem of his pants. "You made them stop because they knew who you were." Malcolm followed her gaze toward the Porsche. In most rooms he walked into, people thanked him before asking what he had done. Avery did not ask how rich he was. She only wanted to know whether the power that had just walked through her farm gate was any different from the power that had just been driven out. "I made them stop because they lied about what they wanted you to sign. But you still spoke before asking me." Malcolm could have explained that if he had been even a few seconds slower, that signature would already be on the paper. He could have said he understood the contract better than she did and had just protected her from a mistake. All of it would have been true. None of it would have made Avery's statement wrong. "You're right." Avery looked at him a moment longer than before, not because he had admitted fault, because he had not added a single word to claim the upper hand for himself. Then she turned back to the trailer, pulled the tarp cord off the wheel, and went on with her work as if a billionaire standing in her yard mattered less than crates of sweet potatoes soaking up water. Malcolm took off his outer jacket, laid it over the fence, then took hold of the other end of the tarp. Avery did not ask him to. She did not stop him either. The two of them pulled the fabric over the pile of produce as the wind gusted hard. Malcolm's thin-soled shoes slipped on the mud, knocking his shoulder against the side of the trailer. Something close to a smile crossed Avery's face. "Does your car have a satellite phone?" "No." "Then you're missing something essential." Malcolm looked at the Porsche out on the road. It had enough sensors to detect the smallest change beneath its wheels, but it could not call a tow truck across a flooded bridge. He followed Avery into the small office beside the barn, where a landline phone hung on the wall by a cord whose twisted coil had faded with age. The rescue service confirmed the road crew had just closed both routes. The nearest inn was 14 miles away, on the other side of the bridge. Night was falling. The water kept rising. Avery gave Malcolm the small room beside the kitchen, where her father used to rest during harvest season. She handed him a clean towel and an old set of work clothes. "You can stay until the road opens." But what just happened doesn't give you the right to decide anything else on this land. I understand. Avery looked at him. I'm not so sure yet. The room held a single bed, a low wooden cabinet, and a framed photo lying face down on the table. Her father's shirt was wide at the shoulders, and on the cuff there was still an oil stain that had been washed many times but never fully disappeared. When Malcolm walked into the kitchen, Avery was setting 3 plates on the table. One plate was covered with another bowl to keep it warm for Micah, her younger brother away at college. The portion of meat on that plate was larger than on the other 2. On the refrigerator were fuel bills, a delivery schedule, a tuition notice, and a notice about the farm's commercial loan. Malcolm read enough to understand that the debt had been bought up by a subsidiary of Halcyon after the Ellison family fell 2 large payments behind near the end of the term. This was not an ordinary home mortgage. The farmland, the barn, and the rights to the season's harvest income were all listed as collateral. He looked at the overdue amount. It was less than what he had once spent on a single fundraising dinner, whose menu he could barely remember. Malcolm took his checkbook from the jacket, now drying by the fireplace. He wrote a figure large enough to cover the overdue balance, replace the lift equipment, and keep the farm running through the winter. The check slid across the table. Avery looked at his name first, only then at the number. She did not touch it right away. She folded the loan notice, set it aside, then used 2 fingers to push the check back across the table toward Malcolm. You stopped them from taking a signature that wasn't theirs. Don't use that to buy another signature from me. A metallic clang rang out in the yard as the wind tore open the barn door. Avery stood up at once, but her body caught for a beat. Her right hand gripped the edge of the table before she stepped toward the door. Malcolm had seen it. Malcolm held the door before Avery could step outside. The wind pressed the metal sheet against the frame, letting out a piercing bang. He braced his shoulder against the door while Avery bent down to thread wire through the handle and tie it to the wall hook. When she stood up, her face briefly winced. What's wrong with your wrist? Avery pulled her sleeve down. Old injury. She turned to check the crates of sweet potatoes near the leaking spot in the roof. Malcolm did not ask further. He lifted the heaviest crates onto the high shelf. Her father's clothes were wide at the shoulders but tight at the arms, making him look nothing like the man who usually appeared on business magazine covers. Near 9 o'clock, headlights swept across the barn door. An old pickup truck stopped in front of the porch. Micah stepped down, backpack pressed against his chest to shield it from the rain. He was 19, tall, thin, with eyes like Avery's, but not yet as practiced at hiding fatigue as his sister. Micah looked at the Porsche out on the road, then at Malcolm, standing there in his father's shirt. Avery only said Malcolm's car had broken down and the road was closed. She did not mention the check, did not mention Graham's visit. But Micah saw the Halcyon papers on the table, the envelope's edge peeking out from under a dry towel. He set his backpack on a chair, took off his shoes, and went to wash his hands, like someone accustomed to only asking hard questions after making sure everyone had something to eat. During dinner, Micah recognized Malcolm from a photo in an economics textbook. But he did not call him a billionaire. He only glanced at the check lying face down beside Malcolm's hand, then at Avery, who was breaking a piece of cornbread in 2. Avery had put the largest portion of meat on her brother's plate. She kept the greens for herself, along with a smaller piece near the edge of her plate. Malcolm waited until she turned away to get water, then swapped his plate with hers. Avery noticed after the first bite. Her eyes lingered on the meat, then shifted to Malcolm. He kept his head down, using his fork to break the cornbread into small pieces. No one said anything. But the kitchen went quiet in a way that made Micah look between the 2 of them longer than necessary. The next morning, the rain had eased, but water still covered the low stretch of road. Avery woke before 6 and found Malcolm at the table with a cup of black coffee. Last night's check had been torn into 4 pieces, set neatly beside the notebook. She took the back of a feed bill and wrote him a list. Clear the west drainage ditch. Move 12 crates of sweet potatoes. Check the generator. Don't call anyone to fix anything without asking first. Malcolm folded the paper and tucked it into his shirt pocket like a directive from the board of directors. He worked through it in order. When the shovel stuck in the thick red mud, he did not toss it aside. When the cart tipped toward the ditch, he held it steady with his whole shoulder. By the 8th crate of sweet potatoes, his palms had started to blister beneath the thin gloves. Micah worked beside him, but kept his distance. Only once the 2 of them removed the generator's cover panel did he ask how a man with thousands of employees knew the difference between a ground wire and a power wire. Malcolm wiped corrosion from the connector. Before the company, I fixed rental cars at a garage south of Atlanta. He did not mention the nights he had slept in the parts storage room because his rented room had been locked. Micah did not mention that he was working part-time at the school library 3 nights a week. The generator's wiring was not broken. One terminal was corroded, and the drive belt was worn thin enough to snap at any time. On the tool table lay an unpaid parts invoice. Malcolm looked at the date printed on it, then at the motionless lift equipment in the corner of the barn. Both needed repair. But only the parts for the generator had been ordered. The money for the lift had gone toward Micah's tuition. At noon, Micah opened his laptop at the dining table. Malcolm walked by just as the screen showed an email from the school. The subject line lasted only a few seconds before Micah snapped the laptop shut. Spring semester deferral request. Malcolm carried an empty cup to the sink, letting the water run long enough for Micah to believe he hadn't seen it. When he returned to the barn, he found Avery struggling to pull a cardboard box down from a high shelf in the storage room. Rainwater had seeped through the roof, softening the bottom of the box. Malcolm caught it before it tore open. Together they lowered the box down. A hard object inside slid out of the damp cardboard, hit the leg of the table, and popped the lid open. It was a yellow suitcase. The fabric's color had faded under a layer of dust, but the price tag was still tied to the handle. Avery bent down too quickly, as if what had just fallen out wasn't a suitcase but a part of her life she had hidden even from herself. The suitcase's lid fell open. Inside was the corner of an envelope, postmarked North Carolina, and a piece of yellow fabric, carefully folded. Malcolm did not bend down to pick up the envelope. He held the tearing bottom of the box, giving Avery time to close the suitcase lid if she wanted. But her hand, resting on the metal latch, lingered too long, as if after 9 years, even hiding this item had become a duty that exhausted her. Avery took out the envelope first. The edge of the paper had yellowed, but her name was still clear beneath the seal of a university in North Carolina. Inside was an acceptance letter for a program in landscape design and sustainable agriculture, along with an enrollment schedule for a fall nearly a decade past. In the bottom corner, someone had circled the start date in blue ink and written, "Mom will be well before you go." Malcolm looked at the handwriting and knew the person who wrote it had never gotten well again. Beneath the envelope was a sketchbook. The early pages were filled with small gardens, paths curving around a pond, and rows of trees arranged to shade seating areas. There was a design for raised vegetable beds meant for elderly people who couldn't bend too low. Another page showed a playground set in the middle of a flower garden, where children could see their parents working nearby. The pencil strokes at the front of the book were sharp and confident. Toward the end, they grew sparser, then stopped, in the middle of an unfinished drawing. "You were planning to go," Malcolm said. Avery folded, the letter closed. "I bought the suitcase." The answer neither denied it nor invited him to ask further. She lifted the piece of yellow fabric from the bottom. It was a dress nearly finished, the collar still pinned with thread, the hem not yet closed. Malcolm assumed it had been bought for the day she left for school, until Avery ran her hand over a slightly crooked seam and said her mother used to sew more neatly, before the dialysis sessions made her hands shake. In the first year Avery postponed school, she kept the clothes packed in the suitcase. In the second year, she took the books out to use the desk surface for her mother's medications. By the third year, her father had started forgetting small things after too many nights sleeping on hospital chairs. Avery took over the planting schedule, the delivery log, and the installment payments. She never once said she was giving up her future. She only pushed back the day she would leave by one more season, then another season, until no one asked any more when she was going. The man who had once wanted to marry Avery waited 3 years. He found a job in Charlotte, rented a 2-bedroom apartment, and sent her a photo of the spare key. He did not betray her. He did nothing bad enough for her to hate him. He simply said he could not build a life with someone who always let that life stand behind everyone else. Avery read the breakup message in the laundry room, where her mother slept behind a thin wall, then replied that she understood. She truly did understand. That was exactly what made the pain linger longer. Malcolm sat down on the low stool beside the suitcase. He did not tell Avery she was noble. Praise for sacrifice is often easier for outsiders to give than for the one who paid its price. "Why did you keep all of it?" Avery set the dress back down. "There are things people don't give up. They just set them down for so long that everyone assumes those things never belong to them at all." Water dripped steadily into the metal bucket out in the hallway. Malcolm thought of parties where women turned their heads as he passed, relationships that ended before they had a name, times he had assumed attraction was just another exchange between power and desire. But in that moment, Avery knelt on the wooden floor, hair still damp from the rain, calloused hands holding a dress that had never been worn. He did not see her as a woman burdened by debt. He saw a part of a life she had carefully folded away so as not to trouble anyone. Avery noticed that look. It was the silence that made her stand up too quickly, clutching the suitcase to her chest before setting it on another shelf. Her right wrist gave a sharp twinge. Malcolm reached out to steady it, but stopped before touching her. The distance between them was no more than the width of a hand. Avery stepped back first. Passing by the room Malcolm was staying in, she saw the old phone on the table. A small strip of tape held the battery cover in place at the back. Beside it was a photo of a woman in a factory uniform, worn-out shoes, and a smile like Malcolm's in the part of himself he always kept hidden. Avery did not go in. She closed the door, the wind had been pushing ajar, then went down to the kitchen. Micah was still sitting at the computer. He did not hear his sister's footsteps because he was staring at the nearly completed online form. At the bottom of the page was a box confirming the spring semester deferral. In the reason field, he had written that his family was facing financial hardship and that his presence at home had become necessary. Avery stood behind the chair long enough to read it all. Just as Micah's hand moved toward the submit button, she set the tuition notice down beside the keyboard. He startled, turning around. Malcolm stood in the doorway, still holding the sketchbook Avery had left behind. No one spoke. Outside the window, the black Porsche was being covered with an old farm tarp, while on the screen, the cursor kept blinking in the confirmation box. Micah pulled his hand back from the keyboard, as if the submit button had suddenly grown hot under his fingertip. Avery did not ask when he had filled out the form. She pulled out the chair across from him, set the tuition notice between them, and sat down. Her right hand still ached, but this time she did not hide it beneath the table. "When were you going to tell me?" Micah looked at the screen. The blue glow made his face look younger than 19, but the shadows under his eyes belonged to someone who had spent too many nights quietly doing the math. "I'm just deferring one semester. Once the farm is stable, I'll go back." The statement carried the exact same calm Avery had once used to tell her mother she was only postponing enrollment for a year. Avery recognized it before Malcolm did. She was about to say she could manage, that Micah only needed to study, that their parents had sacrificed so he could have the chance to leave this land. But Micah opened his backpack and pulled out a folded stack of papers. It was his library work schedule, his dorm bill, and small money transfer receipts sent to the farm over the past 3 months. Avery had never known her brother had been sending money. "I don't need you to keep selling off pieces of this place just to say everything's fine," Micah said. "And I don't need a future bought by you having none left of your own." The words weren't loud. They still silenced the kitchen. Avery looked at her father's jacket hanging behind the door, her mother's boots in the cabinet, and the yellow suitcase just set back on the shelf. For years, she had believed sacrifice was the purest form of love. She had never considered that the one receiving it might grow up under its weight, always calculating how much success would be enough to repay the years others had laid down for him. Malcolm set the sketchbook on the corner of the table and stepped back. This was not a conversation he had the right to steer. But when Micah reached toward the computer again, Malcolm saw the 16-year-old version of himself, the one who had once believed he had to get rich fast enough for his mother's hunger to have meant something. "Don't send it tonight." Micah looked up, his expression closing off immediately. Malcolm did not sit in their father's chair. He pulled a low stool near the door, keeping enough distance that his words wouldn't turn into orders. He asked Micah how many semesters he had left, how much the scholarship covered, and whether the agricultural engineering program offered a work-study option. On the back of a feed advertisement, Malcolm divided the page into 4 sections. Remaining costs. Part-time income. Scholarships Micah hadn't yet applied for. Courses that could be applied toward reducing the farm's operating costs. Micah was studying water-efficient irrigation system design and storage temperature control, the 2 things Ellison Promise Farm needed most. "You don't have to choose between school and helping your sister," Malcolm said, "but you have to stop calling the destruction of your future a responsibility." Micah looked at Avery. He waited for her to object. Avery only rested her hand on the edge of the laptop and closed the screen. She had not agreed to any plan. But she also did not say she would handle everything herself. The next morning, the sound of a diesel engine carried in from the road to the west. The road crew had cleared a temporary path. Terrence's specialized transport truck appeared at the gate. 2 technicians used a low-lift platform to load the Porsche onto the truck bed. Malcolm could leave. Terrence walked into the barn, looked at the loose-shouldered work clothes on his friend, then at the blisters across his palms. Malcolm said he needed to stay to look into the connection between Halcyon and the logistics center Project Vale Meridian was evaluating, a reason solid enough to fit into a work calendar. But Terrence watched, Avery recording the number of crates that had been saved, then looked back at Malcolm. "The car has a way home," he said. "You don't, yet." Terrence left with the Porsche. As the sound of the engine faded behind the row of pecan trees, Avery realized Malcolm had chosen to stay in a place he was no longer trapped in. That thought unsettled her more than learning who he was ever had. In the days that followed, Micah canceled his deferral request, but agreed to apply for more scholarships and switch to a lighter work schedule. Avery let him in on the books instead of hiding every hardship from him. Malcolm did not pay the tuition. He only gave Micah a list of paid internship programs in agricultural distribution, then told him to decide for himself whether to apply. Thursday night, a long spell of light rain caused the old power line to short twice before cutting out entirely. Avery lit an oil lamp on the kitchen table and brought out the debt ledger and seasonal records. Malcolm sat across from her, reading through each page, marking recurring expenses and the weeks with sharp revenue drops. A faint vibration sounded. Malcolm's old phone lay beside the lamp, its screen lighting up on its own after the flickering power woke it. Avery reached over to move it away from a damp spot on the table. Her finger accidentally hit the play icon. A woman's voice came through, thin and tired, but warm enough to make Malcolm stop breathing at once. "Malcolm, I know you're busy, but Mom isn't calling to tell you to come home." The woman's voice paused. Behind the recording were the sounds of a heart monitor and a wheeled cart rolling down a hospital corridor. Avery kept her finger on the screen, not daring to turn it off. Malcolm sat motionless across the lamp. His face did not change. Only the hand gripping the pen tightened until the knuckles went white. "I just want you to remember one thing. You don't have to win every room to deserve love. Some people don't need you to solve anything at all. They just need you to be there." The recording ended with a soft breath. Avery set the phone back exactly where it had been. She did not apologize for listening. An apology would have turned that moment into an intrusion, when Malcolm's expression showed he had already been locked inside that voice for far too long. The message had been sent at 8:17 in the evening. His mother passed away at 10:46. Malcolm's plane landed after midnight. That evening, he had been negotiating the acquisition of a transportation company on the verge of bankruptcy. More than 4,000 jobs depended on the deal. The lawyers said if he left the room, the bank might walk away. Malcolm believed closing the deal was the best way to protect everyone, including the mother, lying nearly 600 miles away. He saved the company. He did not make it in time to see his mother one last time. The woman who had once been engaged to Malcolm waited 2 more years. She did not leave because he did not know how to love. She left because everything in his life was always placed behind something more urgent. Malcolm sent flowers instead of showing up, bought plane tickets instead of apologies, and promised that after the next deal, after the next quarter, he would learn to live like an ordinary person. When she returned the ring, Malcolm did not keep it. From then on, he let people believe he stayed single out of coldness, wealth, or arrogance. The truth was simpler. He did not want to make one more person wait in a room he always arrived at too late. Avery did not say his mother must have forgiven him. She did not know what the woman who had passed had thought. She only pulled the oil lamp closer to Malcolm, so the light fell clearly on the numbers in the ledger. A while later, Avery told him the man who had once wanted to marry her had also waited. He waited through her mother's hospitalizations, 2 failed harvest seasons, and the first year her father began leaving the tractor keys in the refrigerator. Finally, he asked if Avery could ever choose him, just once. She had not answered. In Avery's mind, choosing him meant leaving her family behind. She later understood he had never wanted to win against her parents and Micah. He only wanted to not always stand behind every obligation she used to define herself. Malcolm closed the debt ledger. "If the farm didn't need you for a month, what would you do?" Avery looked out the window. She said she wanted to see the ocean in winter, when the beach wasn't crowded, wanted to finish a design course, wanted to wear the yellow dress somewhere no one called her Miss Ellison or Micah's sister, and wanted, just once, to drive fast somewhere safe, not because of a late delivery or racing home ahead of a storm. Malcolm did not promise to take her there. He only remembered it. After Avery let him see the full records, Malcolm realized that even after paying off the overdue balance, fuel costs, packaging, and shipping would bring the farm right back to this same point before next summer. The following weekend, Avery invited 3 neighboring farming families, a community development lawyer, and Ruth Bell, the county's agricultural finance expert, to the house. Malcolm sat at the end of the table. He did not open the meeting. Ruth spread out the financial balance sheet. She explained that Ellison Promise Farm's difficulties did not exist in isolation. According to the USDA's May 2026 forecast, total farm sector debt was projected to rise by $30.8 billion, or 5.2%, to $624.7 billion. Working capital across the sector was projected to fall 9.2% from the previous year. Avery read the numbers twice. For months, she had viewed every unpaid bill as proof she wasn't good enough to hold on to what her parents had left behind. Now she understood she was standing in the middle of a much larger flood. But understanding that did not make the deadline disappear. Malcolm proposed that Vail Meridian guarantee a 5-year supply contract with the retail chains already using the conglomerate's distribution network. The money would be steady. The produce would have somewhere to go. Avery looked at him. So instead of Graham deciding how the farm survives, it'll be your network. Malcolm did not push back. He pulled the proposal back toward himself. Avery's phone buzzed on the table. She looked at the caller's name, stood up, and pressed the phone to her ear. She said only 3 sentences. By the last one, the hand holding the phone lowered very slowly. Their largest buyer had just canceled the entire winter order. The customer had not canceled over the quality of the sweet potatoes. They had just signed with a larger supplier, one with automated packaging systems, traceability tags, and their own refrigerated trucks. The purchasing manager said Avery's product had always been good, but starting this winter, the company could no longer accept shipments packed by hand or dependent on rented trucks. Avery thanked him before hanging up. She set the phone down and looked at the delivery calendar on the refrigerator. That customer's name filled nearly half the boxes written in blue ink. Days that had once been full were suddenly empty spaces not yet erased. Malcolm looked at the Vail Meridian proposal still lying on the table. If Avery simply agreed, those empty boxes would have buyers again. But a contract controlled by his network would not free her. It would only mean Avery had to trust that Malcolm's goodwill would last exactly as long as he wanted to stay. He folded the papers and put them away. Ruth suggested not making any decision while in a panic. The following Friday, Marlowe County was holding its Harvest Festival. Restaurants, food shops, and regional distributors would all be there. If Avery wanted to find new customers, it was the closest opportunity before her remaining deadline shrank to 11 days. Everyone began dividing tasks before she could come up with another reason to stay put. Micah designed information boards about the produce and farming methods. Another farming family offered to watch the packing area. Ruth brought a list of buyers looking for small but steady suppliers. Friday morning, Avery stood in front of her closet for a long time. Her cleanest work pants lay on the bed, beside the white shirt she usually wore for bank meetings. There was a knock at the door. Odette Freeman walked in, cradling the yellow suitcase in her arms. She opened it, took out the unfinished dress Avery's mother had sewn, and shook it out gently. The collar's pins had been removed. The hem was closed with thread so close to the original color that only up close could the difference be seen. Odette had finished it. Avery touched the new stitching. "This dress doesn't belong at a sweet potato stand." Odette smoothed the shoulder flat. "I didn't bring it for someone selling sweet potatoes." An hour later, Malcolm was helping Micah load baskets of produce onto the truck when Avery stepped out onto the porch. The yellow dress was not elegant in the way women at his galas usually appeared. It was simple, gently fitted at the waist, leaving bare arms that had worked under the sun too long. Avery still wore flat shoes, since she'd be on her feet all day. Malcolm turned to look at her. He had been talking to Micah about traceability tags. The sentence stopped halfway through. Avery was used to eyes that landed on her calloused hands, the mud on her boots, or the hair always tied back in haste. Malcolm's gaze did not skip over any of that. It moved through all of it, and then settled on her, as if strength did not make her any less feminine, and exhaustion did not make her any less worth wanting. He did not tell her she was beautiful. He only opened the car door. At the town square, Avery introduced Ellison Promise Farm herself. Malcolm stood behind the stall, carrying crates, straightening a crooked sign leg, and letting her answer every question. When a distributor from Montgomery asked about output, Avery opened her ledger and laid out the quantities, the harvest seasons, and what the 3 neighboring farms could supply together if they partnered. The woman asked for a meeting. It was the smallest promise Avery had received in months. But as she tucked the business card into her dress pocket, Malcolm saw her shoulders drop, as if someone had just lifted part of the weight off them. That moment lasted until Graham Pike appeared at the end of the row of stalls. He had not brought a surveyor this time, only a leather briefcase and a white envelope. Graham waited until Avery finished with her last customer before stepping forward. His politeness kept the people nearby from noticing something cruel was being set down among the vegetable crates. Halcyon had filed to proceed with the next step of asset processing under the commercial loan. 11 days. That was how much time Avery had left to prove a viable refinancing plan. Malcolm reached for his phone. He could call Halcyon's leadership or the investors waiting on Vale Meridian. One call, and Graham would have to back off. Avery placed her hand on his wrist. Don't. In the middle of the crowded square, her hand rested on his skin for only a few seconds. Malcolm turned off the screen. I need a way out, she said, that when I walk through it, I'm still the owner of my own life. The phone in Malcolm's hand lit up again. A flight notification back to Atlanta appeared on the screen, departing the next morning. Avery saw it. Her hand left his wrist. The distance that had just closed between them returned to what it had been before the Porsche broke down in the rain. Malcolm canceled the flight after Avery had turned away. He did not show her the screen. Late that afternoon, when they returned, Odette was sitting on the porch steps with a brown-covered ledger on her lap. Its edges were worn. Avery's father's name was written in black ink in the corner. She stood up, handed the ledger to Avery, then kept her hand on the cover a moment longer. Your father never called this a debt book, Odette said, but maybe it's time you knew whose names he wrote in it. Avery did not open the ledger right away. She carried it into the kitchen, set it beneath the lamp, and used a dry towel to wipe the moisture off the cover. Malcolm sat at the other end of the table. He did not ask Odette where she had found it, nor did he reach for the frayed string binding it. Some things belong to a family for so long that even curiosity has to know to stand outside. The first page bore a date from 23 years ago. Avery's father had written a man's name along with the line, "Lent tractor 3 days, no fuel charged." The next page listed a widow given use of 2 acres to the east for growing okra after her husband lost his job. In the corner was her mother's handwriting, noting that the 3 Freeman children would eat dinner there during the week their mother worked the night shift. No numbers were ever added up. No column marked what was owed. The further Avery flipped, the more names she recognized. People she still saw every week around town. The man who fixed the barn roof had once received sweet potato seedlings from her father after a flood season. The feed store owner had gone months getting supplies first and paying later. Ruth Bell's daughter had slept on the Ellison's sofa whenever Ruth had to drive to other counties to help farmers file loan paperwork. Your father didn't write this to remember who owed him, Odette said. He wrote it to remember when people were in need. Avery placed a fingertip on a line bearing the name Pike. Not Graham, but his father. 20 years earlier, the Pike family had lost a peach harvest to pests. Avery's father had let them use his storage barn for 6 weeks, free of charge. Malcolm saw it but said nothing. Sometimes kindness passes through a family without staying in all of its heirs. Saturday morning, Odette made a few calls. She did not say the farm was about to be taken. Everyone already knew that. She only said Avery had opened her father's ledger and wanted to ask the community whether a shared packing facility was still worth trying. The first to arrive was Harold Freeman, with an old boxing machine on his trailer. After him came a family of vegetable growers bringing a traceability tag printer they only used 3 days a week. A farmer from the south end of the county offered the cooperative use of his refrigerated truck on days it wasn't hauling berries. No one said they had come to repay a debt to the Ellisons. They set down whatever they could contribute, as if joining work that had always belonged to them too. By noon, the kitchen no longer had enough room. Micah taped a large sheet of paper to the wall, sketching the flow from field to packing. Ruth listed out operating costs. Avery stood in the middle of the table, asking each person what they could contribute, what they needed to be paid, and how voting rights should be divided. Malcolm sat near the window, correcting the numbers Micah passed to him but never standing to speak for her. A U.S. Day document was passed around the table. The 2022 Census of Agriculture recorded 46,738 Black American producers involved in decision-making across 32,653 farms nationwide, operating more than 5.3 million acres of farmland. The numbers fit neatly on a single page, but Avery knew that behind each one stood someone who had once had to prove the land they held was worth more than what a buyer offered for it. The name Marlowe Growers Cooperative was written across the top of the board. Malcolm proposed setting up a revolving fund to purchase the packing system. Avery asked who would control the money. He answered, the co-op board. 1 vote per farm, regardless of size or output. Vale Meridian could provide technical support, buyer connections, and equipment guarantees, but would not own the land, hold veto power, or put its name on the barn. Avery added 4 more conditions. Ellison land could not be transferred to the corporation. All costs must be disclosed publicly. Profits would be reinvested into shared operations before being divided. No structure could bear the name of any living person. A few people glanced at Malcolm as that last line was read aloud. He simply initialed the corner of the draft, confirming he had read and agreed. The meeting ran into the afternoon. As people began packing up, Malcolm stood and offered his chair to Odette. He was about to return to his spot by the window when Avery hooked the empty chair beside her with the toe of her shoe and pulled it out. Malcolm sat down, keeping just enough space between their elbows. On the table, her father's ledger lay beside the newly written charter, past and future separated by nothing more than a sheet of paper whose ink had not yet dried. Ruth's phone buzzed. The distributor from Montgomery had agreed to try a mixed shipment. If it met standard, they would consider a 1-year contract. The goods had to reach the warehouse before 5 in the morning on Monday. All traceability data had to be submitted before midnight Sunday. It was only Saturday afternoon. But before nightfall, they would have to gather output from 4 farms, set up the boxing machine, build a batch coating system, and find a refrigerated truck capable of making the more than 2-hour drive. Micah looked at the unfinished diagram on the wall. Outside, Harold had just lowered the old boxing machine to the ground, while low clouds slowly gathered above the row of pecan trees. The rest of Saturday afternoon was spent hauling equipment into the barn, rechecking the power source, and dividing the packing area into rows. By evening, cables ran across the concrete floor, cardboard boxes were stacked higher than Micah's shoulders, and Avery used chalk to write each farm's name on the old wooden board. They worked through all of Sunday. Sweet potatoes were weighed, greens were cooled, okra was sorted by size. Every box had to carry the harvest date, field location, packer's name, and storage temperature. Micah had designed most of the traceability system for a school assignment, never imagining its first real use would be to keep his sister from losing her land. By 9 that Sunday night, the data was finally complete. Micah hit send. The circle on the screen kept spinning. The signal dropped every time the clouds sank low into the valley. He carried the laptop out onto the porch, held his phone toward the road, then moved back near the kitchen window. Nowhere was stable enough to upload the file. In an infrastructure meeting at school, Micah had once read a Federal Communications Commission report. Using the fixed broadband standard of 120th megabits per second, data from the end of 2022 showed that fixed terrestrial service at that speed had not yet been reported as reaching nearly 28% of the U.S. rural population. Back then, the number had only lived inside a presentation. Tonight, it stood between a family and a midnight deadline. Odette remembered the parking lot behind the church, on higher ground, where phones sometimes caught a signal from the neighboring town. Micah clutched the laptop to his chest. Avery grabbed the keys, but Malcolm, standing near the door, asked who she wanted to go with her brother. Avery handed him the keys. Malcolm drove Micah to the church in the farm's pickup truck. The two of them sat in the dark parking lot, wipers sweeping steadily. Micah set the laptop on the dashboard, tilted his phone close to the window, and tried sending again. The progress bar crept to a third, then stopped. Micah lowered his head, breathing slowly, the way Avery did whenever a piece of equipment broke down with no money left to fix it. Malcolm took out his work phone. 1 bar of signal appeared, then vanished. He could call in a team to set up a satellite uplink, but no team could arrive before midnight. This time, Malcolm had no way to turn power into speed. He simply sat beside Micah, waiting with him as each small percentage crept forward. At 11:47, the file uploaded successfully. When they returned, the packing house blazed with light under the generator. Avery stood among rows of labeled boxes, checking codes with Ruth. Her right wrist was wrapped in a thin strip of cloth, but she still sealed the last box herself. Malcolm pulled a chair near the table, setting the inventory log at a height she could read without bending. At 2 in the morning Monday, the shipment was loaded onto the refrigerated truck a co-op member had lent them. The rain grew heavier just as the final door was locked. The moment the driver started the engine, the cooling unit let out an uneven string of sounds. The temperature light flashed red. The auxiliary drive belt had worn through, and the replacement part sat in a shop more than 30 miles away, closed for the night. They had less than 3 hours left. Harold remembered a backup generator mounted on the small truck used for hauling berries. He and Micah pulled it down, but the mounting frame wasn't the right size. Avery brought out the toolbox. Malcolm held the light. Micah measured the bolt positions. Harold cut an old sheet of steel into a makeshift bracket. At 3:18, the convoy left Ellison Promise Farm. The pickup led the way. The refrigerated truck followed. 2 more vehicles carried tools and backup fuel. Malcolm drove, keeping his speed low through stretches where water crossed the road. His discipline from the racetrack kept him from trying to outrun the storm. He read the water's surface, watched the mud shift beneath the tires, and stopped whenever he couldn't see the road ahead. At the main bridge, the barrier lights had turned red. Water covered the painted lines at the foot of the bridge. A county worker signaled that no vehicle could pass. Only the detour through the northern fields remained. Malcolm had never driven it. Avery had, since she was 16, but only in the dry season. She opened the driver's door. Malcolm did not ask if she was sure. He shifted to the passenger seat, handing the wheel to the one who understood this land better than he ever could. The road was barely wide enough for the tires. A water-filled ditch ran along one side, a fence sunk in darkness on the other. Avery took 2 curves, then stopped before a stretch of deep mud. The clock read 4:11. "I'm afraid Micah will drop out of school," she said. "Not because he isn't smart enough. Because he thinks loving me means giving up part of his own life." Malcolm set his hand on the dashboard, not touching her. "This time, you don't have to hold it all alone." Avery shifted into low gear. The pickup crawled through the mud, the rear tires sliding sideways before catching again. The convoy followed the exact tracks she left behind. When the distribution warehouse roof appeared beyond the trees, the clock read 4:53. The receiving door was coming down. Avery hit the horn. Harold flashed his lights. The warehouse manager checked his watch, then waved the convoy through. The first box crossed the threshold at 4:58. The last one was set down just as the minute hand touched 12. A few minutes later, Ruth's phone buzzed. A message from the distributor confirmed the shipment had met temperature standards, the traceability data was valid, and the entire order had been received on time. The next message came at 9:12 that morning, while Avery and the others sat at a diner near the distribution warehouse. The distributor agreed to sign a 1-year trial contract, on the condition that the cooperative maintained the standard of that first shipment. Ruth forwarded the email to the Community Development Finance Organization, reviewing the refinancing application. The answer did not come right away. None of them expected it to anymore. The conditional approval email arrived that afternoon. It did not mean Ellison Promise Farm was immediately safe. It only opened the last door. Over the following 6 days, the distribution contract was signed, the Marlowe Growers Cooperative Charter was ratified, the equipment was appraised, and each member submitted confirmation of their contribution. Malcolm did not push the finance organization using his name. Vale Meridian guaranteed an equipment fund controlled by the co-op board, but took no land as collateral. Avery signed as farm owner. Ruth signed as financial manager. Micah sat beside them, checking every number but never missing an online class. On the afternoon of the 6th day, the new loan was disbursed. The balance held by Halcyon's subsidiary was paid off. The asset processing rights were terminated. Avery read the confirmation document in the barn, amid the sound of the boxing machine and the smell of dirt still clinging to the sweet potatoes. She did not cry loudly. She only rested her hand over her parents' names in the ownership history, then stood still long enough for Micah to step over and hug her. He did not apologize for the tuition. Avery no longer promised to carry everything for him alone, either. Graham Pike came the following afternoon. He brought no surveyor, no new envelope. Avery walked out to receive the release of asset processing rights. Malcolm stood in the barn but did not follow her out. He no longer needed to be present for Graham to respect Avery's signature. When the SUV drove away, she closed the gate herself, tested the lock twice, then went back to her inventory count like someone with an entire afternoon of work still ahead of her. 3 days later, Malcolm returned to Atlanta. He said the board had postponed too many meetings and Vale Meridian needed him back. Before getting into the car, Malcolm set the key to the small room beside the kitchen on the table. Avery looked at the key. "You'll need it when you come back for your clothes." The closet held only one of her father's old work shirts and a pair of gloves torn through the palms. Malcolm did not say so. He nodded, then stepped down off the porch, leaving the space between them unfilled by any promise too large to keep. 3 weeks later, Avery took the yellow suitcase down. For the first time, she packed clothes into it. A jacket, flat shoes, the sketchbook, and the dress her mother had started and Odette had finished. Avery drove herself to Barber Motorsports Park. Malcolm had just finished a lap when he saw her standing by the fence. He took off his helmet but did not step toward her right away, perhaps because he feared that moving too fast would turn her presence into an answer she had not yet had the chance to give herself. Avery walked toward him. "I don't need you to save the farm anymore. I know. I'm not here to thank you either." Malcolm held the helmet in his hands. "I know." She looked at the Porsche cooling down behind him. "I came because I want to know where we can start, now that neither of us owes the other anything." Malcolm did not hand her the car keys. did not embrace her as if he had been waiting for a reward. He only asked Avery what she wanted. "Starting from where you stopped deciding things for me," he nodded. 11 months later, the Marlowe Growers Cooperative had 12 members. Micah continued in agricultural engineering and brought his water-saving irrigation design to the farm as a semester project. Avery finished her first landscape design course, turning the empty lot behind the barn into raised beds for the town's elderly residents. Malcolm still moved back and forth between Atlanta and Marlowe County. He did not set up an office in the barn, did not rename the farm, did not buy the largest house nearby. Some days he only came to eat dinner, replace a generator belt, or sit at the end of the table during a co-op meeting. To the rest of the world, Malcolm remained cold. In boardrooms, he still made people double-check their numbers before speaking. But with Avery, he remembered she liked her coffee with little sugar, knew when her wrist was aching, and always asked before reaching to help carry something she was holding. Avery did not become a woman living in a billionaire's shadow. She still ran the farm, still argued with Malcolm, still had days when she told him to go back to Atlanta because he was standing in the wrong spot on the packing line. That same year, Avery completed a high-performance driving course with a professional instructor. Malcolm did not buy the course for her. He only sent her the information after she asked. One winter morning, they returned to the track when no race was scheduled. Malcolm placed the Porsche's keys in Avery's palm. She took the driver's seat, adjusted it, and set both hands on the wheel. Malcolm walked around the front of the car and sat down beside her. The yellow suitcase sat in Terrence's car near the technical area. Inside were 2 tickets to the Atlantic coast, where Avery wanted to see the ocean in winter. The engine started. The gate leading onto the track slowly opened. The gate ahead opened wider, and the Porsche slowly rolled toward the track. Malcolm was not only handing Avery control of his most treasured car, he was placing in her hands a part of his life he had never before trusted enough to give to anyone. Avery did not sit behind the wheel as a woman who had just been rescued. She had come by her own choice, after keeping the farm, keeping her brother's future, and finding again the woman she had once folded away inside a yellow suitcase. Perhaps mature love is not meeting someone strong enough to carry every burden that wears us down. It is meeting someone patient enough to stand beside us, respectful enough not to seize the wheel, and genuine enough to stay after we no longer need them to rescue us. Malcolm once believed power meant the ability to make every road open before him. Avery helped him understand that some roads only appear when a person knows how to slow down, how to listen, and how to accept that the one they love has the right to choose a different direction. Avery once believed that loving someone meant that someday she would have to choose between him and the things she was responsible for protecting. Malcolm did not ask her to leave the farm behind, did not turn the land into a gift bearing his name. He only sought a place in her life, and waited until she herself pulled that chair closer. How do you feel about Malcolm and Avery's story? Do you believe that someone who has lived too long in solitude can still learn to love again when they meet the right person, at a time when both are mature enough not to turn love into a debt? Perhaps you've known a woman who spent nearly her whole life caring for her family, and forgot she had dreams of her own. Perhaps you yourself once had to learn that accepting help does not mean losing your dignity, and that loving someone does not mean handing them the right to decide your life. Share your feelings or your own story in the comments. Who knows, your experience might help someone else realize they still have the right to begin again, no matter how many years their suitcase has sat on the shelf. Thank you for staying until the end of the story. Thank you for listening to Malcolm and Avery's pain, silences, and journey back to themselves. See you in the next story, where perhaps another heart is also on its way to finding where it truly belongs.